Oh, all righty. This is not ESPN's 30 for 30, but it is my 98 for 98. The 98 seasons in the history of the New York Football Giants. And we're going to try to get it done in 98 days. Now, probably not going to get it done in 98 days. However, I do want to get it done before the beginning of the regular season, which starts September 10th. Giants Cowboys should get it done by then. But we're halfway through the 50s. We're forging ahead. We're doing 98 seasons. This is the 31st season in the history of the New York Football Giants. 31st season in the history of the Giants. 36th season in the history of the NFL. NFL started in 1920. Giants started in 1925. This was the second season for head coach Jim Lee Howell. He took over for Steve Owen. Steve Owen had coached the Giants for 23 seasons from 1931 to 1953. So Jim Lee Howell took over in 1954. 1954 was, successful season. They didn't have a losing record. It was 7-5. Once again, didn't go back to the championship. Same thing would happen in 1955. 1955, they slipped a little bit, just a little bit. They were 6-5-1. Once again, didn't have a losing record. One of the things, there was a few things we're going to start changing for the Giants. The winds were going to start changing. They were going to start blowing in another direction. They were going to start blowing in the Giants' favor. After the 1955 season, Otto Graham, the Hall of Fame quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, thankfully. I guess back then, Otto Graham was kind of like, the Tom Brady. A lot of teams nowadays, just kind of hoping and praying, waiting for Tom Brady to retire so he would stop going to Super Bowls and all that. Well, back then, Otto Graham went to 10 straight championship games. So when Otto Graham was playing, you could just forget about your team going to the championship if you're in his division because he won. All 10 of them were not in the NFL. Otto Graham took the Cleveland Browns to 4 consecutive championship games in the All-American Football Conference. Then when they joined the NFL in 1950, he took the Cleveland Browns from 1950 to 1955. He took them to 6 straight championship games. So, but every year he was in it. Every year from 1946 to 55, he played for 10 seasons. Every season he took his team to a championship game. He was 7-3 in the championship games. So that I'm sure that was one thing that helped the Giants. But also between drafting and trades, now the Giants got a few good pieces to the puzzle this season in 55. But in 1956, they would get an additional 4 pieces to the puzzle. So basically, they had a bunch of pieces, but between, like as I said, the 1955 and 1956, they would get an additional 7 pieces to the puzzle. So if you're looking at 22 players, offense and defense, trades and drafts, and 7 more players they were going to add. So basically, they added a third of their soon-to-be championship team, soon-to-be, the championship team was in 56, and then they went to championship games. They didn't win any of them after they lost 5 of them after the 56 season. But they did some good trades, and they did some decent drafting, really helped build their team going forward. So, but in the 1955, the NFL draft, we'll start off with the draft here. The 1955 NFL football draft was held January 27th and 28th. It was 30 rounds at the Warwick Hotel in New York City. This was the 9th year that the first overall pick was a bonus pick determined by a lottery, with the previous 8 winners being ineligible for the draw. Only the Baltimore Colts and the Chicago Cardinals, Green Bay Packers, and Pittsburgh Steelers had an equal chance of winning. The draft lottery was won by Baltimore, who selected quarterback George Shaw. Kind of odd because they also selected some guy it was the 9th round. Let me check this out. There was only one Hall of Famer picked in this whole draft. Yep, round 9. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. My bad. They didn't select him. Somebody else selected him. But it's kind of odd because the Baltimore Colts selected George Shaw with the number 1 overall pick in the 1955 draft. The Baltimore Colts selected a quarterback. Well, in the 9th round, the only Hall of Famer in this whole draft class got selected by the Pittsburgh Steelers. It was a quarterback by the name of Johnny Unitas, who would shortly after this go on to join the Colts and become a Hall of Fame quarterback and lead them to two championships. And actually, then they won a Super Bowl with him too as their quarterback. But it just goes to show you, I mean, the Colts selected George Shaw, and, he was certainly nothing special. But the Giants, let's see, round 1, they did some trading. So I'll just go over the first 10 picks that the Giants had. They traded some picks away. They did some wheeling and dealing back in the 50s, actually in the 60s too, and in the 70s. They did a lot of wheeling and dealing. But the first round, the Giants selected Joe Heap, a halfback from Notre Dame. Second round, the Giants didn't have a pick. Third round, the Giants drafted one of their stalwarts. It was one of the pieces to the puzzle in round 3 from Penn State, defensive tackle Roosevelt Grier, number 76. And unfortunately, after 62, Ali Sherman, I think, wanted to start getting younger, so he traded, or I think they traded him, or he went to the Rams, where he became part of the Fearsome Foursome from 1963 to 1966. Roosevelt Grier was part of the Fearsome Foursome. 1967, in a preseason game, he wound up, I think he tore his Achilles, and his career was over. But the Giants drafted, Roosevelt Grier, so he became the Giants wound up between their middle linebacker and their front 4. They added all 5 of those guys between 55 and 56. They also changed in 1956. They also kind of changed their defense a little bit. I'm going to go over that in a little bit. Tom Landry kind of changed his defense a little bit. But I'll go over that in a minute. So the Giants added a good piece of the puzzle in round 3. Roosevelt Grier. Round 4, they didn't have a pick. Round 5, they had a pick. They took Mel Triplett, a back from Toledo. Now, he scored a touchdown in the 56 championship game. He was with the Giants for a few seasons. Let's see here. Does it say? Yeah, he was with them for 6 seasons. Then his final 2 seasons, he wound up with the Minnesota Vikings. So Mel Triplett was a very good running back, very good complimentary piece. And the Giants had Alex Webster. They had Frank Gifford and Mel Triplett from 1955 to 1960. So for 6 seasons, they had the three real good running backs there. Got all complimentary. If you wanted to like a running back by committee or whatever, Mel Triplett was a very good running back. Then they took Ron Lachlan, an end from Wisconsin, in round 6. Round 7, they didn't have a pick. Round 8, though, this is where another piece of the puzzle. Mel Triplett was a piece of the puzzle. But also round 8, they got Jim Patton, a defensive back from Ole Miss, from Eli Manning territory. So he wound up kind of one of those things. It's kind of like, the guy wound up with a ton of interceptions. It's kind of why I'm wondering why he never made it in the Hall of Fame. But he was a huge piece of the puzzle for the New York Giants. Very good defensive back. So he was a piece to the puzzle. Then let's see here. Round 9, Giants didn't have a pick. Round 10, they took Leah Pasley, a back from Ole Miss. There you go. I don't see it. Yeah, I mean, they took. I don't see any more. I mean, as I said, they wind up with 30 picks. It's I mean, that was a lot of picks back then. As I said, I'm just looking. I don't see any more standout picks here for the Giants that they wind up selecting, or really, shall I say, nobody that's ringing a bell. I mean, a lot of these guys obviously also, around 25 and 26. I mean, you're scraping the bottom of the barrel here. Yeah, I don't see. Let's see, around 29, around 30. Yeah, I don't see him there. So I mean, but they added a few good pieces to the puzzle in the draft in 1955. Now, if we look at their team here, they really started getting a good. They had Alex Webster. They just drafted. They had Frank Gifford. They had Kyle Rote, who was an end. And he was a running back, but he got switched to end after he had suffered an injury. They got Mel Triplett. Don Heinrich was their quarterback, but also Charlie Connolly. They had Bob Schnelker, an end. Ken McAfee was like the tight end or another end, but they said Kyle Rote was there too. Then they had Jack Stroud, Ray Whiteteca, Roosevelt Brown. So I mean, their offense was good, but what wound up happening was in 1956, they added 4 additional pieces to the puzzle, all on defense, and that's where it really came together. That's where their defense really started standing out. And that's where, in the from 1956 to into the 60s, they had a really, really good defense. Now, what happened was, basically, I kind of like Tom Landry had he ran kind of like a 5-2. They had two defensive ends. They had two defensive tackles. They had like a middle guard. So basically, kind of like 5 defensive linemen and 2 linebackers. Well, what happened in 1956? They added 4 pieces to the puzzle. Their 4 defensive linemen were Rosie Greer, Dick Modulewski, Jim Catkavage, and Andy Robustelli. But what they did was they took those 4, and what Tom Landry did, they also drafted Sam Huff in the 3rd round of the 1956 draft. So instead of having kind of like a middle guard, they brought Sam Huff, and they made him like the middle linebacker. So basically, the object of Andy Robustelli and Catkavage and Dick Modulewski and Roosevelt Greer, those 4 guys were to occupy the blockers and leave Sam Huff free to roam and make the tackles. And that's exactly what he did. And that one of the huge reasons why he's in the Hall of Fame. But they added those 4 pieces. They drafted Catkavage. They drafted Sam Huff. They traded for Modulewski, and they traded for Andy Robustelli. This is in 1956. So they got 4 more pieces to the puzzle on defense in 1956. And that's what really made their defense solid, really, really solid. The defense this year, I mean, 55 was so-so. What are they? They scored 22 points a game. They gave up 18.6 points per game. 18.6 was 3rd in the league out of the 12 teams. So their defense was good. They just didn't score a ton of points. You'll notice, they were in the Eastern Division with the Browns. I'm going to go over the Browns. You'll notice that the Browns scored a ton of points, and the Giants just had a hard time keeping up with them. The Giants, let's see. Oh, here we go. We'll go over their games and schedule here. They started slow. Once again, as always, okay, and this would be the final season that the Giants played in the Polo Grounds. This would be the 31st and final season that the Giants played in the Polo Grounds. Starting in 1956, they would play in Yankee Stadium. 1925 to 55, Polo Grounds. So this was the 31st consecutive season the Giants started anywhere from 2 to 4 games on the road. This particular season in 1955, they started with their 3 first games were on the road. First, because they were sharing a stadium with the New York Baseball Giants, and they wanted to make sure that the baseball Giants season was over with, And also possibly if the baseball giants went to the World Series, they want to make sure the baseball season was over and the World Series was over, I guess, before they occupied the Polo Grounds on a full-time basis and started chewing up the field. So, unfortunately, their first, basically almost pretty much, if you look at the Browns won a division, they only had 2 losses. So they had 1 tie, they had 2 losses. If you basically look at it by that, the Giants fell out of contention after the first 3 games of the season because they lost all 3 games on the road. They, the final 9 games, the 12-game schedule, final 9 games, they had a nice record, but they lost the first 3 games. The first game of the season was on Saturday, September 24th. They played in Philadelphia. They lost 27-17. The second week on Sunday, October 2nd, they played the Chicago Cardinals on the road in Chicago. They lost 28-17. Third game of the season on Sunday, October 9th, they played in Pittsburgh. They lost 30-23. So they started the season 0-3. They would only lose 2 more times the rest of the season in the final 9 games. They would go 6-2-1, which is, nice record, of the final 9, but they started 0-3, which wound up being, basically almost took them out of the contention right off the bat. So they got their first win Sunday, October 16th at home against the Chicago Cardinals. They would win 10-0. Let's see here. What do we got? Then Sunday, October 23rd, they would play the Pittsburgh Steelers at home, and they lost 19-17. So now after 5 games, the Giants are 1-4. Basically, when you have a good team like the Cleveland Browns every year, they're winning, almost all their games every year, and you're 1-4, basically your season's over with. So let's see. Then the following week, the Giants played the Washington Redskins at home. The Giants won 35-7. So now the Giants, they're 2-4. Then they went 2-5. The following week, on Sunday, November 6th, they played the Browns in Cleveland. They lost 24-14. Giants are 2-5. Season's over. Nothing to play for but pride. So they finished strong. Really, really finished strong. I mean, they didn't lose in any of their final game. They went 4-0-1 their final 5 games. So the Baltimore Colts came to town. And on Sunday, November 13th, the Giants beat the Baltimore Colts 17-7. Then the following week, on Sunday, November 20th, the Philadelphia Eagles came to town. The Giants beat them 31-7. Back-to-back wins. The Giants would tie the Cleveland Browns the following week at the Polo Grounds, 35-35. Then let's see, then the Giants ended on the road the final 2 games. They beat the Washington Redskins 27-20 on Sunday, December 4th. And so that put them at 5-5-1. So basically the final game of the season, if they could win, they would have a winning record. If they lost, they would have a losing record, obviously. If they tied, they would be 500. But so they won. They went on the road. They won in Detroit, which was always a hard place for the Giants to win. The Giants beat the Detroit Lions 24-19. So the Giants finished at 6-5-1. But if we look at, with the Cleveland Browns, did. I mean, they scored like half the games they scored over 30 points. And the other games, a lot of the other games, they were scoring well over 20 points. They lost their first game of the season, 27-17. But then they won 38-3, 21-17, 24-14. Then they went 41-10, 26-20. They went 24-14. Then they lost their second game of the season, their second and final game of the season that they lost. They lost to the Eagles 33-17. Then they won 41-14. They tied the Giants 35-35. Then they won 30-7. And the final game of the season, they won 35-24. So they were scoring a ton of points. I mean, they had a decent defense. Their defense was nothing super spectacular, but they just scored a lot of points. And I said Otto Graham was one of the main reasons why, and he finally retired after 1955, thankfully. Let's see. Yeah, and by far, the Cleveland Browns by far scored the most points. They were the only team in the NFL out of all 12 teams to score over 300 points. They scored 349 points. They gave up 218. They gave up the fewest, and they scored the most. And they had the best record. They were 9-2-1. The Rams in the Western Conference were 8-3-1. What do we got here? The league leaders. Jim Finks of Pittsburgh led the league with 2,270 passing yards. Alan Amici, he was a rookie then in 1955. He led the league rushing in 961 yards. Pete Pihos. Let's see here. Was the receiving leader for the Eagles. He had 864 yards. The NFL Most Valuable Player was a couple of different awards. The NEA NFL Most Valuable Player went to Harlan Hill of the Chicago Bears. Otto Graham won the UPI NFL Most Valuable Player with the Cleveland Browns. Sporting News NFL Player of the Year went to Otto Graham of the Cleveland Browns. So, but the 1955 NFL season. 1955 NFL season was the 36th regular season in the history of the National Football League. NBC paid $100,000 to replace Dumont as the national television network for the NFL championship game. The season ended with the Cleveland Browns defeated the Los Angeles Rams 38-14 in the title game. Said that the draft, as I told you, was held on January 27th and 28th of 1955 at the Philadelphia's Warwick Hotel. Major rule changes. The ball is dead immediately when the ball carrier touches the ground with any part of his body except his hands or feet while in the grasp of an opponent. A new exception is made in regard to scoring a safety. When a defender intercepts a pass, his intercepting momentum carries him into the end zone, and he is stopped before returning the ball back into the field of play. Then the ball will be put in play at the spot of the interception. Conference races. The defending champion Browns, who beat the Detroit Lions in the 1954 championship game 59-14. The defending champion Browns dropped their opener at home to the Redskins 27-17. But a 6-game win streak put them back in front to win the Eastern race. The Western race was crowded a few times as the Rams had to share the lead. In Week 8, the Bears beat Los Angeles 24-3 to give both teams 5-3 records. The next week, on November 20th, the Bears took the lead with a 24-14 win at Detroit, while the Rams got a 17-17 tie at Baltimore. As had happened many times before in the annual Battle of Chicago, the Bears were upset by the Cardinals in Week 10. They're upset 53-14. Wow. The Rams eked out a 23-21 win in Philadelphia on Les Richter's field goal with 7 seconds left to go in the game. Wow, that saved their season. That saved their season right there. In Week 11, the Rams won 20-14 over Baltimore, and the Bears kept their hopes alive with a difficult 21-20 win over Detroit. In the latter game, the Lions' Doak Walker missed an extra point, lost a fumble late in the game on Detroit 28, and was wide on a 35-yard field goal attempt in the final seconds. So the Lions certainly could have won that game. But the Bears won their last game on December 11th, 17-10 over Philadelphia to finish 8-4, and hoped that the 7-3-1 Rams would lose their game in Los Angeles against Green Bay. The Rams did not lose, clinching a spot in the title game with a 31-17 win. So it came right down to the wire. But the Cleveland, the Los Angeles Rams wind up winning the Western Division with an 8-3-1 record. And the Cleveland Browns were 9-2-1. So it wound up being, so a couple really good teams made the championship. So the championship game, but it wasn't much of a championship game. The Browns went ahead and pretty much took this one home. Let's see here. It's 1955. It was so the Western Division hosted the odd-yeared championship games. So the Western Division, it was 1955. The Western Division hosted the championship game. So the game was played in Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. So in the even-numbered years, the Eastern Division hosted the championship games. So the 1955 NFL championship game was the 23rd league championship game, which started, the league championship games officially started in 1933. It was played on December 26th at the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum in Los Angeles, California. It was between the Eastern Conference champion Cleveland Browns and the defending champions, and the Los Angeles Rams, the champions of the Western Conference. The attendance of 87,695 broke the NFL championship game record by nearly 30,000. Wow. This was the first NFL championship game played on a Monday, and the first televised by NBC. It was played on a Monday. Wow. In their sixth consecutive NFL title game, the Browns were 6-point favorites. The Browns successfully defended the title and won their third NFL championship of the 50s in a second straight rout, 38-14. The Browns won 1950. They won 30-28. Then they won 1954, and then they won 1955. They lost 51 in 1951. They lost 1952, and they lost 1953. But this is their second consecutive win. Browns successfully defended the title, won their third NFL championship in the 50s. But it was 38-7 at one point, and the Rams scored the final touchdown of the game. The Browns, their next and most recent league title would be in 1964. But that was so the last time the Browns won was in 64. So we're going back. That was the year I was born. They won in 1964. So it was 59 years ago. It was the last time the Browns won a championship game. This was the Rams' fourth title game in 7 seasons, with one victory in 1951. The Rams went to the title game in 1949. They lost 14-0. They went to the title game in 1950. They lost 30-28. So then they finally won in 1951 once they beat the Browns. Let's see, the Rams, they did not reach the league's big game again until the Super Bowl in January 1980, when they lost to the Pittsburgh Steelers, 31-19, I believe it was. And they did not win a Super Bowl until January of 2000 as the St. Louis Rams, when they beat the Tennessee Titans. That was a good game, really, really good game. Came right down to the wire. Really good game. It was 23-16, I think it was. The first half, the Browns veteran Lou Groza kicked off. Rams rookie halfback Ron Waller returned the kick, and Groza himself made the tackle. A subsequent Rams drive was stopped at the Cleveland 12 when Kenny Kuntz intercepted a Norm Van Brocklin pass. Browns quarterback Otto Graham, who had announced his retirement at the end of the season, drove the Cleveland to the LA 26, where Groza's field goal gave the Browns a 3-0 first quarter lead. The Browns scored again when defensive back Don Pohl intercepted Van Brocklin pass on the Browns 35 and raced 65 yards back for a touchdown, making the score 10-0. The Rams answered back when Van Brocklin connected with halfback Skeet Quinlan for a 67-yard touchdown, pulling the Rams to within 3 points at 10-7 and giving the large crowd hopes of an upset. But late in the second period, Van Brocklin threw his third interception of the half. Defensive back Tom James, who had been beaten on the Rams' Tom Fears title-winning touchdown in the same field 4 years earlier, grabbed the errant pass and took the ball back to midfield with time running out. The next play turned a close game into a rout. Otto Graham found Dante Lavelli with a 50-yard touchdown pass along the sideline, and the Rams, who moments earlier were driving to take the lead, went to the locker room down 17-7. The rout continued in the second half. Graham earned his place as the star of the game after moving the Browns from the LA 46. Graham kept the ball and ran around right end from the 19 and scored to put the Browns ahead 24-7. On Los Angeles' next possession, Sam Palumbo intercepted another Van Brocklin pass at the Ram 36. Graham drove the Browns to the to the 4, then scored himself on a sneak. Gross's conversion increased Cleveland's lead to 31-7 with 2 minutes left in the third quarter. In the final period, Graham tossed a 35-yard touchdown pass to Ray Renfro, and Gross's kick gave the Browns a 38-7 lead late in the game. Waller ran 4 yards for a touchdown, and Les Richter's conversion finished the scoring. In the final minutes, Coach Brown sent a reserve quarterback, George Rattleman, and allowed Graham to leave the field to an ovation from the Los Angeles crowd. They gave him a standing, I believe it was a standing ovation, if I'm not mistaken. Cleveland, with its third title of the decade, represented the American Eastern Conference in a championship game every year since its admission to the NFL. Celebrated Graham's farewell. The Rams' Van Brocklin threw 6 interceptions. Often was quoted that it was the worst game of his Hall of Fame career. I'd say so. Throw 6 interceptions in the championship game. One was run back for a touchdown. Another one right at the beginning of the game halted a drive at the 12-yard line. I mean, oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, if he didn't throw any, I mean, of course, but I mean, if he didn't throw any interceptions, the game probably might have been quite a bit different. But it is what it is. The Browns were victorious, 38-14. This was the Browns' third NFL title. They won in 1950, won in 1954, they won in 1955. But it was a little bit of a bummer season for the Giants. They finished 6-5-1, but they said in 56 with 2. And we're going to go over this when we talk about this tomorrow. But due to 2 trades and 2 good draft picks, the Giants really fortified their defense. They got their front wall and they got their middle linebacker, and that would be the key to victory. The 1956 season for the Giants. They had their offense, but they had their defense, and that defense would carry them forward for the next 8 seasons into 6 championship games. Unfortunately, out of the 6 championship games, they would only win 1, but it's tough. They would go 1-5 in the next 6 championship games, but they had good teams. They had good teams and had good seasons, and the 1956 season would be championship number 4 for the New York Giants. But 1955, they had a winning record. The Cleveland Browns, Otto Graham, quarterback, would retire, so that would help the Giants. But 1955 was nothing special. At least they didn't have a losing season. But so that pretty much wraps up the 1955 season for the New York Football Giants. And I'll be back again tomorrow with the 1956 season of the Giants, which happened to be their 4th championship season, and which also happened to be the 32nd season in history of the New York Giants. I'll see you then.